coming today. Let's go ahead and begin. So a couple of items of business just to make sure to check the volume on your computer. If you are not muted, go ahead and do that now. That's what the little icon is for muting in Teams. If you have your camera on, you can turn it off. I will be leaving my camera off, and that is just merely to help with the connectivity, especially in the afternoon as more people tend to be online. We will also be making this as interactive as possible, but we will be doing things into the chat. So if you haven't opened the chat up on your screen, I would appreciate to do that, and double check that you just have microphones and your cell phones are muted so you can get as much out of today as possible. So without further ado, here is just to introduce myself. My name is Linda Burrows. I am the K-12 Social Studies and World and Native Languages specialist here at the Department of Education. I've taught public school for 20 years. Most of that was middle through high school. I taught French, Spanish, and English in middle school students, and then I also taught English and social studies to high school students. That is the probably most recent picture of my family. My son is now a sophomore, so it's a couple years old. A sophomore at ASU. He's getting a sports journalism degree. My daughter is a recent graduate of the University of Arizona with a triple major. And she majored, Arabic was one of her majors, and she's doing a fellowship with the State Department, but unfortunately from home, virtual, with her professors in Morocco and Egypt. And then my husband is a teacher in social studies teacher in the Phoenix area. So in the chat, I want to hear about you guys and where you are all from. So if you could just briefly introduce yourself by typing your first and last name, type the current position that you teach and language that you teach, and I would love to know where everybody is from. And while you guys are doing that, as a little item of business as well, you will receive a copy of this presentation with all of the hyperlinks and your attendance recorded. I would say roughly within a week is usually what it takes. Sometimes I can get it done a little bit sooner, but I will definitely get it done within a week from now. So thank you all for coming. This is great to have so many people here today. Window Rock, nice. Oh, I bet it's nice and cool up there for you. San Carlos, wonderful. Thank you guys all for coming. We've got some elementary teachers, 7th grade ELA and humanities, fantastic. Cochise, welcome. Welcome. Sierra Vista, wonderful. I actually finally drove through Sierra Vista, what was it? I guess a couple summers ago. We decided to go down to Bisbee and then kind of came up the back way through Sierra Vista and over towards Patagonia. It's beautiful, beautiful country. Wendy, nice to see you again. Cheryl, you as well. Lovely to have you guys here. Let's see, Spanish model, dual language team, fantastic. Coolidge, wonderful. Thank you guys so much for coming. This is fantastic. Oh, we have so many people here. This is wonderful. Oh, this is great. Sholo, wonderful. Thank you for coming. Cottonwood, oh great. Prescott, oh this is great. I'm so glad you guys are all here today. Fantastic. So I just do this as kind of, I can download the attendance sheet, but I always like to have a little bit of a redundancy to make sure that I give you guys credit for coming, because you all want to get credit for the hour that you are here with me, as well as my goal is that you would hopefully have something that you can take back and start using right away in your classroom, as well as some ideas to help you go further in down the road of items and things like that that you can take and do going on from there. I will ask you again at the end of the hour to do the same thing, and you'll just have to put your first and last name in, so that way I can just double check the attendance and make sure that everybody's here. And I think we do have a couple people that have joined us online using a cell phone, and obviously that makes it a little bit harder to type in the chat. So if you want to send me just send me an email with your name and say, hey, I was phone number, 2345, whatever. That way I can make sure to get you your credit, and then you can print out your certification in about a week. So let's go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be looking at what is proficiency. It's something you hear about a lot, but yet it's something that I think we need as teachers to sometimes take a step back and look at and define. and look at what does this exactly look like. Then we want to make sure that, how do we use it then in our classroom. So I'm going to advocate for using a backward design kind of model for doing that, and really implementing I can statements. And then what I want to do is hopefully apply some of these proficiency standards to a unit. And we'll just kind of do a fictional unit and see how that goes. So you can see what this kind of looks like in action. So I'm going to make sure everybody is muted here. There we go. All right. So first of all, our pathway to proficiency, right? What exactly does this look like? And so everybody's on the same page. So we're starting off, and I like this analogy. I got this from Linda Ignatz, who is she was a teacher of the year for ACTFL years ago, but now she works for the Global Seal of Biliteracy. And so she has given me permission to kind of steal this analogy, because for me, this just made perfect sense in my brain for what proficiency is. So when I think of proficiency, this makes sense to me, that a novice low learner is just like a baby learning how to walk. Their word count is small. They can do introductory kind of basic vocabulary words. They may have a few high frequency memorized phrases and some common vocabulary, things like numbers, nouns, words, color words. Food is another big one. And then as our students progress, they go from being just a little infant to now we've got a novice mid learner, which this to me is like a little baby doing, with those little walkers, I guess is what you would call them, where they can get around a little bit more. They can form simple sentences, asking and answering questions, maybe do some short descriptions with a few memorized structures involved. Expanding vocabulary is something you see a lot with novice mid students. And then also a lot of these novice mid students will need a lot of visual support at first as they're learning their languages. Next, we've got novice high. And yes, I know she has a little chunk kind of taken out of her helmet. I was trying to remove some of the background and I couldn't get her helmet to come out just right. But a novice high student is one that basically can form elaborate sentences. They can ask and answer questions with details, a series of sentences you'll see in a novice high student, as well as they will have vocabulary on multiple topics, but novice high students will still have quite a few structural errors. And then we get into our next set of student learning, which would be more like an intermediate student. So intermediate students, an intermediate low would be just enough to get by. They can create communication with personal messages. They will have frequent grammar errors. In this case, intermediate low students, oftentimes the message is maybe more important than the form. Vocabulary acquisition does start to slow down quite a bit with not intermediate low students, but students can actually start to string together a sequence of sentences, which is really important, especially I think this, I will say, is a little humbling for most of us that, we've been learning and speaking languages for so long, that going back and learning a new language where you start over again as that novice low, novice mid learner, it really is kind of humbling as you can go through and do this. In 2017, I went to Bosnia and spent a month in Bosnia learning BCS, learning French and Spanish. I'd never learned a Slavic language. And starting over again as a novice low learner is a really interesting way to look at things from a teacher point of view, where I had to start over again and gaining that vocabulary. And it's, I think it's important to look back and remember where our kids are coming from and where they're going. So as we move along, our intermediate mid students are all about practice and practicing more with native speakers as their language ability develops. They can create and communicate personal messages with far fewer grammar errors, but still with some grammar errors. The message for an intermediate mid student becomes very comprehensible at this point in time. Oftentimes, intermediate mid students can mix and match sentences and vocabularies. They will create and respond to questions, and definitely they can organize sentence strings to make more sense and almost get to that paragraph level. And then now we get to intermediate high. And an intermediate high student is one that can communicate on a wide variety of topics. They can use past, present, and future with some errors. They'll be organized and can write at a paragraph length pretty easily. They will struggle on occasion, but they can survive in unexpected situations. So if something comes up that they maybe don't know about, they will be able to figure it out. And then they also can narrate a story in the past with descriptions. And the last proficiency level that I'm going to focus on, because this is really the highest that we typically get to in a K-12 setting, would be advanced low. So advanced low to me is like that sports card, right? This is where a student can communicate on a wide variety of topics, including more professional topics. They can very easily use past, present, and future with few errors. They're very organized and their paragraphs can come to them easier as they write. And they can also handle situations with complications and narrate stories both in the past and the future, as well as being easily understood by those that are unaccustomed to, say, like a non-native speaker. So now what we're going to do, now that I've been kind of yammering on about this, I'm going to go out to a Jamboard and I'm going to put this here into the chat for you guys just to get some interaction. Let's go ahead and do that. So what I've done is we've talked about our novice learners and our intermediate learners, and that's where we're going to focus on our proficiency for today. And what I would like for you to do is, as you join, is, you start off as that novice low, and we always want to be keeping in mind as teachers, what's that next level? Where are we having our kids go to? So I want you just to kind of brainstorm what might be some goals that you might have for a novice low learner, or novice low, mid, and high. And we'll just do them all at once to make it a little bit easier here. But if you haven't used Jamboard, it's kind of a fun way to get some interaction. Here is on the left-hand side where this toolbar is the sticky notes. So you can come here and you can type a sticky note where you can say, let's see, we want students to write in complete. And then you just click save and that pops up here. And I think that would be roughly about here with a novice mid student that we want them to have that goal. So let's go ahead and just take a minute to kind of brainstorm what might be some great goals that we would want to have for novice learners, right? Keeping in mind that these are just those first babies, right? I'll move my screen here so we can see some of the pictures, because to me that metaphor that Linda Ignatz used, let me go back here, was just perfect. So go ahead and move those as you guys see fit. Okay, just drag and drop them where you think they would go, and you can feel free to add more than one. Good, definitely vocabulary is such a big goal to have. Basic needs, that's great. And you guys will have access to these even after the presentation is done. So the Jamboard is linked to it. So it's always something that you can kind of come back and evaluate. And this might be a good idea as you come through and start to develop rubrics and ideas for how your students can start to use their proficiency and kind of being aware of it. Definitely being able to speak using complete sentences is huge. I got really excited when I was in Bosnia for that month when I could actually write a paragraph without, having to really follow a formula. So, I mean, at the most I got to an intermediate low. But yeah, these are great. Specific words, communicating complete sentences, define vocabulary with examples. That's a good one for novice high. Using sentences, very organized. Those are great. You guys have got fantastic goals that you have. These are wonderful. Listing 3 items in the sentences, capital, yeah, definitely capitalization, and spelling is something, definitely it's not something that we want to harp on. There's nothing more boring than having to have a grammar lesson. But the idea of, doing that in context, because kids do need to learn how to spell and how to write properly and what's the syntax and how does the sentence, go, especially when you're thinking maybe non-Romance languages, Latin languages that way. Okay, let's go ahead and let's look at some goals for, I'm going to switch the page here, and you can feel free to go back if you want, but let's look at intermediate. So with intermediate, what might be some goals that we want for intermediate students? So, and this is tricky because as intermediate students, right, this is where our kids, really slow down with their language growth. And so it's really important that as we go through this, that we set some good goals that will keep them engaged, that will get them moving as their language acquisition goes along. And so what might be some good goals that you would have for an intermediate student? Definitely speaking in a variety of tenses. Yep. Oh, I like the idea of more connections. Whomever put that out there, that's a good one. Using correct verb tense in written work. Oh, these are great. Oh, writing a 5-paragraph sentence, 5-sentence paragraph, excuse me, that's a good one too. Comprehension, that's a great one. Reading an authentic text and understanding it, I think, is huge. Participating in conversations, that's good as well. Oh, I like the explaining daily activities. That's a good one too. Using words with synonyms. Oh, that's great too. Yeah, getting our kids past some of those cognates, right, would be huge for intermediate goal, intermediate students. Understanding things in context, I think, is another one where you can start to introduce that more for like an intermediate, mid to high student. Having to figure out vocabulary in context would be fantastic. Oh, asking a variety of questions to get more details. That's great interpersonal communication. That would be fantastic. Wonderful. Oh, these are really good ideas. Just like a minute more to finish this up. Oh, understanding without translating, that's a huge one. Just participating in conversation. I think that's key, right? We've got to get our kids in the conversation, using our conversations. I think that's fantastic. Yes, absolutely. Using text to support their answers. I love that one. That's great. All right. Let's see. I think we're going to go ahead. I'm not going to have you do the advanced one just because I think that might take too much time. So let's go ahead and go back to our presentation. So just as that way you guys have this, you'll have that information on the Jamboard as well as we look at our goals. But again, novice low learners, right? Some of the goals which you guys put on there, definitely increasing word count based upon their needs, getting our students excited about, learning the language and getting involved in that are some of those goals. And it definitely, you're right, it is a slow process and speed does impact it regardless of how old or how young our students are, right? Novice mid learners, right? So our little babies and walkers going around, definitely some goals would be focusing on chunks of languages that can be ordered, useful questions and answers, describing self. All of these that's just a couple of the great goals you guys had in your on the Jamboard. And then for novice high learners, this is describing people, places, and things. Definitely getting some of those conversational skills, creating an elaborate, organized narratives are huge for our novice high learners. And then this is where we get into our like intermediate low and starting into our intermediate mid, this is where we want to see our kids getting that proficiency, so that way they can earn the seal of proficiency when they get into high school. So whether you're teaching elementary or you're in a dual language immersion kind of program, right, we want our kids to ultimately earn that seal of biliteracy. We want to acknowledge this great thing that they've done. And so this is where we want to get our kids and get them focused on at least getting to this, right? So describing events, intentional recycling of vocabulary structures, supporting opinions is huge. So whoever said talking about text and backing it up with text is definitely something that you have. And yes, you will definitely be getting these all in the handout. So you'll have links to the Jamboard so you can look at those notes too later on, as well as these slides. And then here we have our intermediate mid. This is for more commonly taught languages. This is where we want our kids to get proficiency wise with our, for the seal of biliteracy. So again, right, the message is comprehensible. They can do organized strings of sentences, describing events in 3 time frames, absolutely community related conversations, right? We want our kids to be able to participate where they are and where they're living for certain. And then intermediate high learners, definitely some goals are using the language to create products for, you know, real audiences, right? We want kids to be able to use their languages, whether they're going to college or they're getting a job out of high school. We want them to use it. And even when they're still in school, right, if they've been in a DLI program for years and they're out in the store and someone's not understanding, why can't they use their language? I think that's really important to understand that. Storytelling and deep cultural issues. So these are all these goals that we have for our intermediate learners. And then advanced learners, again, this is just a little description. You know, they're communicating on a wide variety of topics, past, present, future. This is where we'd love to get kids to by the time they graduate high school. So as we're doing this, right, the whole idea is that as we know our proficiency levels from novice low to advanced high, there are higher levels than that, but we probably won't see that too much in a secondary setting. Kids will get above advanced low more in college when they've been taking the classes and things like that longer. But we want to always keep in mind that our goals for our proficiency recognize where our students currently are and knowing what is ahead. And that's really clear. That needs to be clear actually for our students. It's not something that should be secret. It's not something that kids need to try and figure out on their own. Knowing where they are on that like scale here for proficiency and where they're going can really add to some engagement and some motivation for kids that maybe didn't think of it before. And so this is something that as we go forward and as we are creating our classrooms and we want them based upon proficiency, this idea of always knowing where are your students and where are you going really needs to be that driving force as you create your lessons and your units and all of that goes with it. So just as a basic kind of overview, right? So novice students, you'll end at a novice high with something that's memorized, formulaic, repeating. An intermediate student will then start to be more creative, maybe a little bit chaotic, and some remixing and reusing of sentences and ideas and vocabulary. And then advanced low would be, our original, organized, and repurposed lessons in that way. So now that we know kind of clearly what is proficiency and what these levels are, and you guys, I think, have a pretty good handle on what the goals are that we want to have our students for advancing them through, how do you get that into, how do you translate that right into the classroom? Because I think that's the, $1 million question. So there are a couple of things, and again, I'm, not by any means the end all be all, but I find backward design to have been really, really helpful in my teaching. And if you don't know what it is, we're going to go through it just real quick, especially with an eye and a lens for language learning. And, there are really structured ways to do this, but I find if you just keep it simple, it's actually pretty easy to implement in your classroom. So again, it's not an approach to teaching. It's really, and it's not even a teaching method. Basically, backward design is just a framework for when you go to do your lesson plans and your unit plans, or if you are part of like maybe a district group that is presenting the scope and sequence or coming up with a scope and sequence for your district or for your school, right? Backward design is that framework that you use. And again, it gets to this whole idea that when you're teaching, you are more goal focused and goal oriented because you know where you want the students to end up. So what is that end goal for our novice low students that we want them to be at the end of the semester, at the end of the year, so that way they are at that novice mid or maybe moving into a novice high situation. And so that's really the key idea that's really all backward design is it's just where do you want your kids to end up? And then how are you going to get there? Now, as far as languages goes, a colleague of mine that works for the Ohio Department of Education had, I stole some of this stuff from him. I asked him if it was okay to use it because just, why reinvent the wheel? So he's got this great graphic that I think takes backward design and puts it into just a 3-step plan. And so this is what I'm going to share with you guys today. And again, you will have access to all of this online. So that way you can have it and have access to it, and it's linked here so that way you can go out to the Ohio Department of Education and get more if you'd like. But essentially, backward design from a language point of view has 3 steps. So the first step is, and we'll go into this in more detail, are really identifying those learning outcomes. And that's essentially what we did just now, was what's the proficiency level, what's that goal that we want our kids to get to, and then a couple of other items into it. And then once you know your outcomes, where you want your kids to be, now you go back and start figuring out, okay, how are we going to get them there? And you have to figure out, well, how are we going to know that a kid gets to, novice high? How do we know that? And so you look at IPAs, you look at different tasks, authentic resources, and we're going to get into this more in depth. And then last part of it is really planning the actual learning experiences. And so this is where you get into the actual lessons that you use in your class. What kind of authentic resources do you use? Which of the modes of communication are you going to use? And the higher level thinking skills and getting into it that way. So this graphic I just thought spoke to me and made it kind of lined it pretty easy for me. So as we look at, again, the 3 steps, starting with just identify. So identifying learning outcomes. These are your components to consider. So this will be the state standards that we have, which are proficiency based. They are the levels of your students, where they are, the different themes that we have within our within your units, and then essential questions that you want kids to be able to ask and answer at the end of each unit, and then relevant can-do statements. And then step 2 is really determining the acceptable evidence. And so this is where you're going to determine what assessments are good at showing the achievement of those learning outcomes. So whatever your goal is, you want to make sure that you have an assessment that matches that goal. And that's kind of the key, is aligning those 2 things. You don't want to just ask them some multiple choice test that really doesn't figure out, do they know and can they achieve at, a novice high level. Definitely you want to use summative integrative performance assessments, or IPAs, with rubrics. And again, I really advocate, let the kids know. This is not something that needs to be secret. It doesn't need to be hush hush. If the kids can get that buy-in where they see, oh, okay, I didn't achieve at this level because I made too many errors, or maybe I couldn't speak for a long enough time frame, or I could only write 3 sentences instead of 5, then knowing that is what helps them engage in that better. And then lastly, are planning those instructional activities to help students achieve the goals of those units. Activities then become more relevant and effective in the outcomes, with the outcomes in mind. And this is something I definitely, as we look at from a state level. When you look at and interview students and find out, what do you want out of your language learning experience, right? They all want to do things that are relevant to them. So just learning, clothes for the sake of learning clothes is not, who cares, right? But learning clothes to maybe go accomplish something or in some bigger context of something, okay, that now makes a difference. And that's where the tricky part is, where you want to match that learning with something that engages your kids and is obviously, appropriate both for the language, their proficiency level, as well as for intercultural content too, because that's all part of the standards. So let's get into these in depth. So first of all, we want to identify our learning outcomes. And so this is where, again, we need to look at our standards, right? And so the standards for Arizona are based upon ACTFL's proficiency standards. And so they go along that same, novice low, novice mid, novice high standards. I sent out a link for you guys prior to the standards. And then you also want to, when you're identifying these learning proficiency levels, then you look at the can-do statements. And so we're going to get a little bit more in depth with these, but you want to look at already can-do statements that are kind of already created from ACTFL for novice learners, intermediate learners, or if you teach an advanced, language class in high school, or maybe depending upon how long your DLI program has gone on, right? You may start to have some advanced learners in the higher grade levels. Definitely don't reinvent the wheel, right? We all want to work smarter, not harder. So use what's already out there, and then figure out those targeted proficiency level, determine unit themes, and develop questions. So in this case, right, I want to kind of walk you guys through this and do it with you, so that way when you get done with this, you'll have something to do. So I've taken our standards for Arizona, and these are the standards, all the standards actually, for a novice mid student. And because our standards are proficiency based, it doesn't matter whether you are in second grade at a FLES program, whether you are in third or fourth grade in a DLI program, or whether you are in, a sophomore in high school taking intro, Spanish 1-2 class, right? Regardless, the standards are the same because it's all about where you are in that language learning. So in this case, we have interpersonal communication, we have interpretive listening, interpretive reading standards, presentational speaking standards, presentational writing standards, and then we have a bunch of cultural competencies. And the cultural competencies are not meant to be taught as a standalone kind of unit. It's not like, oh, hey, we're going to have, Culture Mondays and let's talk about it. It should be something that is seamless and integrated in with your lesson planning. So if we were doing backward design and we're wanting to implement the proficiency into our standards, let's go ahead and, for sake of our purposes today, we're going to focus on these two standards. We're going to look at interpersonal communication and cultural competencies. So when we want our students, our novice mid kids, we want them to communicate on very familiar topics using a variety of words and phrases that have been practiced and learned. And then our cultural competencies, we're going to focus on the recognizing basic practices, products, and perspectives of cultures where the target language is spoken, and then participate in age-appropriate and culturally authentic activities such as celebration songs, games, dances, and recognize products of the cultures. So as we move on, once we've now looked at our standards, now we want to look at the can-do statements. So as we look at can-do statements, and again, I took these straight from ACTFL and I've given you guys the links out there. So it's real easy to just, again, work smarter, rather than working harder. Go out and take them. It's all open education resource or OER resources. So you can take it, reuse it, mash it up however you want. So that way you can use these in your unit plans, your scope and sequence. But when we look at this, an I can statement is where you take the goal of where you want the kid or student to be, and you turn it into an I can do something. And I will admit, being completely honest with you, when I first started hearing about I can kind of statements, I was thinking, oh, that's just so basic, and no one talks like that, right? No one says, I can, put on my shoes. However, I will say I have become a convert. I thought that this was silly and kind of juvenile at first, but I'm telling you, it totally works, especially for language learning. And it really gives your students a sense of where they are. And again, because we want those goals related for proficiency, we want them to move ahead where we want them to go. And so in this case, this is the main, I can communicate in spontaneous spoken, written, or signed conversations on both familiar and everyday topics using a variety of practice, memorized words, phrases, simple sentences, and questions, right? It's a mouthful and it's really, really broad. So what you can do is you can now take this, and here we have our I can statements. And again, these are even generic still. So we're going to do this in practice where we've got I can request and provide information by asking and answering a few simple questions. Excuse me. And then I can request and provide information by asking and answering some original questions. Again, these are pretty generic. So I want to practice creating I can statements. So let me go ahead, and I've got another Jamboard out here for you guys. And this one, we are going to, I have it on a different page, identifying the learning outcomes. So let me put this into the chat for you. And so again, so that way we're doing kind of the work of this. So let's pretend, okay, that we're creating a unit on clothing. We want our kids to learn about all different kinds of clothing. This can bring in some culture of clothing that's worn in the target culture, target language culture, country, excuse me. So what I'd like for you to do, and again, just use the same sticky note, and you can pick any of these 3 generic I can statements from ACTFL and come up with what might be a good I can statement on clothing. And so take a minute and let's do that for me, please. Again, we want to keep in mind, right, that our students can, make it simple, because then they do understand where they're coming from. So if we keep in mind, that interpersonal communication, we want to have some interaction between students. Oh, that's a good one. I like that one. I can list clothing items that I'd pack for a trip. That's a really good one. So you can move some. I'm going to move some of these over here. Great. And the trip too, that can be great because you can bring in all sorts of neat things for, target country, get some culture in there. I can request an item from a clothing store. Oh, that's a good one. I can describe the clothing another person's wearing. Oh, that's great. Oh, these are fantastic. I can recognize and name some clothing from different countries and cultures. Oh, these are so good. This will be good too, because again, I can sew a button on my shirt. Oh, how fantastic. I mean, I'm kind of old school and I'm old, I'm not gonna lie. I had to take a home ec class, and definitely it's something that, I had to teach my son and daughter how to do this because they, couldn't do it. So, ooh, describe clothing from different weather. Oh, I can ask how much clothing items cost. Oh, that's great. I can exchange travel items for different seasons. I can list and describe the significance of my native traditional dress items to non-native listeners. Oh, that is beautiful. I love that one. Oh, these are fantastic. Again, I'm totally sold on I can statements. I thought that these were going to be something that was really juvenile with my middle school and high school kids, but it's not. They really understand and can see, oh, okay, either I can do this, Or I can't do that. Oh, I can help my mom fold clothes for a church setting. That's fantastic. This is great. And you can get into all sorts of cultural things with where your students, where you live, where the target languages are spoken. You can talk about traditions and even elaborate things further with that. And I think that's really key to this. Oh, I can give advice on clothing for different seasons. These are great can-do statements. I can separate the dirty clothes by color. Oh, I love it. That's definitely one my son could have done when he lived at home. I'm not gonna lie, I don't miss the smell emanating from a high school boy's bedroom. Which, for those of you that have had high school boys at home, you can understand exactly what I'm talking about, right? These are fantastic I can statements. Oh, I can buy the correct clothes for my cousin's wedding. Oh, that's a great one. So these are fantastic. So this is essentially what you're going to want to do is you come up with your units, right? You're going to want to take these generic, really broad I can statements and then take them and make them into something that is more concrete, something that's more tangible, more easily understood by our kids, right? Oh, I can put the dirty clothes in the laundry basket. That's great. I can describe the clothes I'm wearing. I also like using I can statements too, because it's also something that you can do multiple times. So it's not like just you're going to hit novice mid close with your students, right, in a novice mid kind of class. But maybe you want to talk about where the clothes are made in a more intermediate high or intermediate mid kind of class or advanced low class, right? Where are the clothes made? What are the labor, restrictions of where kids are coming from and all of that kind of stuff. So these are fantastic. Okay, I'm going to go back. Oh, I can design my clothes by cutting them up. Oh my gosh, this is fantastic. Oh, you guys are so great with these. Oh, correct clothes for PE class and different types of sports. And you can see how you can expand this out, and you can also help kids identify, like, what do they want to do with clothing, right? And depending upon who your kids are, and really listening to them, you can take this further and make it very, very relevant for them. All right, we're going to go on because I'm going to have you come up with some other ones for cultural communication. So when we look at can-do statements for intercultural communication, these are from ACTFL, and ACTFL's intercultural communication is a little bit more, well, it's been revised since we've done the Arizona standards, to put it plainly. And so in ACTFL, their intercultural communication I can statements are definitely more in depth than what they are with Arizona standards. And so that's something that when we get to a point of revising our standards, because I think our standards are already great in the fact that they're, pretty proficiency based, but that may be something that we will want to look at and be pulling teachers in to really say, do we want to kind of follow more of what ACTFL did? I personally think it's great to kind of get this a little bit more in depth and detailed with culture. And I think it's really important too that we also, with culture, look at who are our students and have them be able to compare their culture that they currently have, right, with the culture of the target language. And I think that's huge. So let's go ahead and let's go back to that same Jamboard here. And we're just going to go to the next page. Again, because I want you guys to get used to this idea of how would you use and create your proficiency-driven classroom, right? You're going to want to come up with these can-do statements. So what might those can-do statements look like if we are using intercultural communication? Noticing that in this case, it's not really moving students from a novice mid to a novice high. It's just this is what's accepted for all novice students. So I like that they have the difference between novice investigate and novice interact, which I think is huge. So see if you can come up with some I can statements that are more culturally based. Oh, I like that I can compare the difference of formal dressing in different cultures. That's really good. And also you have to think too, depending upon the unit and depending upon the lesson, you might have multiple I can statements as you're going through this, right? And that's okay. You don't need to have just one I can statement. You will have probably maybe two or three that are, for a lesson, or maybe in a unit you may have multiple ones. And I'll show you some of those as we get further on. Oh, I can describe the colors of clothes for different events. I can select appropriate clothing to wear at an event. That's great. I can communicate with other students about what we wear for certain clothing. Oh, popular cuisine, that would be great. Clothing, you're going to wear different things. I can order what I'd like from a restaurant. Yeah, how do you dress for different restaurants? I think these are all fantastic. I can identify and name differences in clothing materials. Oh, common uses. Oh, that's a good one, of clothing in different cultures. That's great. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move us on here because I do have some other things. Oh, I can discuss special. Oh, now you guys, we've got a bunch of them popping up. Let's look at these real quick before we move on. Oh, I can identify indigenous design elements in modern clothing. I love that one. That's fantastic. Oh, the meaning of jewelry in different cultures. That's great too. Organize clothing on shelves by different cultures. Oh, great. Oh, what the colors mean. That's fantastic. Oh, these are great. And you guys can come back and look at these, after the fact. But I want to make sure we've got about 15 minutes left of our webinar. And I want to make sure I get you guys everything that you can. So once still with the learning outcomes, right, we want to determine unit themes and essential questions. So again, the unit themes would be what kind of ideas or issues do you want to develop a unit around? Again, I emphasize, look at, oh, you guys can't see this? Let me make sure that I'm sharing my screen. Let's see again. Definitely make sure that you are talking with your student and you figure out what is it that your students want to, want to learn, right? All right, let's see. Okay. And definitely current events are great ways that you can, look at and get some of those themes about units. You want to develop essential questions then, like questions that you want your kids to be able to ask and answer throughout the unit. And then also develop formative and summative questions. And those summative questions should be tied to that unit assessment. So if I go back to, let's see, the Jamboard here, I just want to click here. So what might be some unit themes that we have with clothing that we could investigate? So for me, this would be something that I might do depending upon, obviously the age of your student and what is appropriate or, not appropriate, right? So for example, if I was doing a theme on clothing for younger kids, I might do like a laundry role play, or maybe washing clothes, going on vacation, what to pack. For older kids, I might look at where the clothes are made, the materials, the fabric, the labor of the clothes, who's making the clothes that you are wearing, kind of thing. And then also too, like a good thing that you could look at is like themes of like how our clothes, part of our identity, right? And who we are. And then also we've got things like essential questions too. So essential questions would be things like, you want to make sure that they include rigor, right? And that we push our kids both with vocabulary and our grammar skills. So we want to model these things for our students in our questioning. Sports teams, that would be a great one to develop like an essential question around it, right? Getting students interested in the topic and getting them understanding these kinds of things. So these are some clothing of the world. Oh, that's a good one too, different themes. And then if we go to this last page here, this would be like essential questions of, you know, what we would want our clothing to have. So this could maybe be one that I would do. Oh, I don't want to do that. That's doing a picture. If I'm doing a sticky, like an essential question that I would think of would be, should our school have? It's a really good question that kids can debate, right? And I just want to put that out there so you have that as an example and we can come back to it later. But just, again, this would be a topic that will get your kids interested in conversation. They can talk about it, what would be in a dress code, and this can all be around your unit on clothing. So it's not just, oh, hey, we're having a unit on clothing, but you know, we're actually discussing a dress code and what is that dress code and what should that look like and what should we wear if we have a dress code, that kind of item. All right, so let's go ahead and move on just because I'm feeling a time crunch here. So getting into our determining acceptable evidence, right? And so this is where we want to do integrated performance assessments or IPAs, which basically is, again, it's that idea that your assessment matches your goal, right? You want to use authentic resources. So what exactly are authentic resources? And in this case, you can look up things like YouTube videos from the target, you know, that are in the target language, magazines that are in the target language, music videos, traditional clothing or manufacturing images, books and children's literature, TV, news programs, newspapers, right? These are all authentic texts that you just want to make sure that the context is appropriate and that you're giving students opportunities to make meaning in the text. And then also you might need to scaffold and maybe help using authentic text, you may have to scaffold it and help the students with some background knowledge or maybe context clues or maybe some interpretive strategies. Feedback is also another thing that you'll want to make sure that you are doing as you're using authentic text with your evidence for your kids. So again, you want to also pick your modes of communication. So in this case, for our unit on clothing, right, we did interpersonal tasks and cultural competencies. Now, you're going to want to use all of these. If you're doing an entire unit, the unit should have interpretive tasks, interpersonal tasks, presentational tasks, and our cultural competencies. But just for, you know, speed of us pretending it's just like a lesson, think of it this way, where, you know, our interpersonal task is maybe they're using and doing an interview, but maybe you have them using an infographic as a guide, right, to kind of scaffold some of the questions and answerings that you would want kids to do. You could do things like a guess who, where students have to ask and answer questions about others or maybe about people that you show. All of these can be adapted to an online kind of setting. You could do a Pictionary of clothing where one student has to, you know, draw something and another kid has to guess it. I always liked doing speed dating kind of activity. This definitely would be more of a, I would say, middle to high school, where your kids assume a role and they have to go around and try and find a person that matches them or is complementary to them, not necessarily in a romantic dating way, but maybe you put two baseball players together, two football players together, two ice skaters together, right? And so they have to find the other person that's like them and go around and talk to them in the target language. A fun one for younger kids, and even I'm amazed at how much older kids like still to do younger kid kind of things, or things we would assume younger kids would do, like, you know, pin the clothes on the clown, right? Or any kind of card games can be adapted to different things with, with this, and or some kind of online schedule. scavenger hunt can also be done. So again, be creative and get those kids asking and talking in different ways. And then last thing you always want to have are rubrics, right? And so we want to make sure that kids know, again, where they are and where they're going. And so, again, I stole these from the Ohio Department of Education. They were wonderful in letting me do this. So this is something that I would have a student fill out. And I think these are great, where it's like, here's your, what can I do here in the middle? What are my strengths? And what are my goals? And you have things that are emerging and developing. You've got up here your target levels. Again, you will have access to all of these. I just want to get through all of this before we get to the end of the hour. And this is great too, just to show you an example of, yeah, it is like a no KWL chart. And this is a performance rubric for interpersonal speaking. And if you go out to the Ohio Department of Education, they actually have them already done for all the different modes of communication. So again, feel free, have at it. Work smarter, not harder. Take them and use them. They're great, but it's great because you just have to circle the things of where you think the student is. The student also, if you post these, right, and you develop something like this, it's great because the kids then know, oh, okay, if I have a basic range of appropriate vocabulary, I'm developing. But if I have a good range of appropriate vocabulary, and then maybe you define that as a PLC or as a district, you know, then they know, okay, I really need to work on it and adding some more vocabulary. Maybe I need to just do some flashcards or something like that to bring it in. But definitely use rubrics and let the kids in on them. Let them know, and that's going to help them see where they are on that proficiency scale and where they want to go moving on. And then lastly, you want to plan learning experiences. So these are things like prior knowledge, using your can-do statements. This is where you're doing your actual lesson planning. And I advocate, honestly, planning as a group PLC. It doesn't have to be that, you know, oh, all the Spanish teachers plan together, all the German teachers plan together. I would do it honestly by proficiency level and then just adapt your plan to the different target language. So I would have all the novice, you know, mid or novice low teachers get together and plan their lessons, and then go into, you know, then have all the, you know, novice high and intermediate low teachers plan those lessons. And definitely, again, make sure that you're using all those modes of communication. You're using intercultural competencies, that they're not just like, okay, it's Culture Monday. Keep those authentic resources. There's a lot out there. You just have to kind of look for it. Our newsletter, I'll put out stuff all the time. Look at different teaching and learning strategies that you can do where kids are using that target language both in communicative and in comprehensible ways, right? And then always teach vocabulary in context as well as grammar in context. Don't pull it out and make it something where it's like, okay, we're going to talk about sentence structure today, right? We want to use it in context, and kids will eventually get it. And I think that's the key. We get hung up on teachers that, oh, it has to be written perfectly. And you know what? It doesn't, because when kids are learning languages, when they're the first little babies, right, they're making mistakes, and that's okay. And so that's what we want to do. Definitely. Yeah, the performance level descriptors are really, really helpful in doing your lesson planning. And then use those formative assessments as checks. And we are almost out of time. So we are going to just, again, as a reminder, right, identify learning outcomes first, determine that acceptable evidence, plan learning strategies. And I was going to have you put into the chat what you think would be the easiest about this and what would be the hardest about it. But you know what? That's going to be your homework assignment because we've got a minute left. So think about what is going to be the easiest part on this and what's going to be the most challenging part on it. And then look for help. Look for your, you know, fellow people out in the community. And then also reach out to us. This is our website for the World and Native Languages here. We've got our PDF of the native languages here. We also have a resource page. We have videos. In fact, I can show you here real quick. Here's our page here. If you come out here for PD videos, we have a couple here that you can watch and recorded webinars here this is on just implementing the standards and basics, as well as we've got archived newsletters, which if you aren't, let me show you here real quick, every month, and I have not put out February's yet because I've been wanting to really prep for this newsletter or for this presentation, but we do a newsletter. And so every month I send this to you. So if you're interested in getting on our newsletter distribution list, please put your first and last name into the chat and I will add you to our distribution list. But this has trainings, it's got pedagogy, it's got travel opportunities, it also has resources and stuff. So if you're not on our distribution list for our newsletter, please do that. Put your email in there and I will add you. Know that your email means you want to be on our newsletter distribution list. And with that, I thank you guys so much. I know I went over just by a little bit. Type your name first and last into the chat. If you want to be on the email, please just include your email address and I will add you to that. It will take me roughly a week. Also, this is the first time we have done this presentation, so any feedback I would love and appreciate. And with that, thank you all very much. My email address is down there at the bottom. Contact me and let me know if there's anything I can do to help you guys out. That is my job, is to help you implement these standards to the best of your ability so we can get our kids, you know, learning languages and going further with their language learning. So thank you all so much for coming today. Have a fantastic evening, afternoon, and please stay safe. I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm also going to stop recording. Here we go.